Mark A. Altman, Daren Dochterman, Ashley Edward Miller. 3 fans who became professionals and then became Treksperts. Inglorious Treksperts. Listen wherever you find podcasts or go to trekspertsplus.com.
Hey, this is Mark A. Altman, one of the co-hosts of Inglorious Treksperts. And if you're a Trek fan, you owe it to yourself to pick up the 50-year mission, the complete, uncensored oral history of Star Trek. It's available wherever you buy books, digital or audio. And speaking of books, check out my new book about the making of John Wick. They shouldn't have killed his dog. Also available wherever you buy your books. You see a pattern happening here? Well, what are you waiting for? Get on it. They're here. Yes, indeed. Your favorite 4:30 movie hosts are all back with an all-new season of curating fantasy theme weeks on the 4:30 Movie Podcast. Join Daren Dochterman, Ashley Edward Miller, Stephen Melching, and myself, Mark A. Altman, as we bring you the latest and sometimes not so greatest in movie curation. It's the 4:30 movie. It's fun. It's informative. It's awesome. And until then, Eyewitness News starts now.
Well, here we go. Deck 78.
Well, guys, why don't you all pull up a chair? We got an exciting treat for you today on Deck 78.
I want to pull up the love seat, actually, because I'm going to
pull up.
I'm going to be loving this one
for you and your valiant crew.
We're bringing in Charles Hilderbrandt. Charles is the son of the great Tim Hilderbrandt and nephew of the great Greg Hilderbrandt, the Brothers Hildebrandt,
yes,
who was such a staple of fantasy and sci-fi art in the 70s and 80s. In addition to their brilliant Lord of the Rings work, of course, everyone knew their iconic Star Wars poster.
And a little poster that some people might have seen.
Yeah,
and it's a funny story because Charles is a longtime fan of the podcast. And I was reading this issue of a magazine that I found in my garage. I was looking at these old Starlogs, and it was this long article about this unproduced film by the Hildebrandts. And I'm like, hey, Charles is a fan of the show. Maybe we should have him on to talk about his dad and about this project. This is how I can find out more. Would you like to know more? Well, I'll call up one of our listeners. So I reached out to him. He said, I'd love to. I have great stories. And, you can just sense the love he has for his dad. And that's so meaningful, I think, to all of us that he can share these great stories about his father. Maybe we should have saved this one for Father's Day, but no. But this was I think a real treat for fans of the show. Really, really interesting stories that I haven't heard about Star Wars, about Lord of the Rings, and of course, for all you Deadly Spawn fans, there's a lot of information to glean about that as well. So without any further ado, let's bring in Charles Hildebrand, star of The Deadly Spawn. Well, as you know, given it's the 40th anniversary of The Deadly Spawn, it was very important to us to bring that film's star to the podcast, none other than Charles Hildebrand. But of course, that's not really why you're here, but we'll pretend it is, right?
Of course it is. That's the reason I'm here, right?
That's what the agent told him.
I'm sure it is. I know it is. I got the memo because I brought a Deadly Spawn with me, so that.
Oh, nice.
Oh my, Mom, is that you?
That is so cool. Oh, wow. My God. Wow. Well, and for those of you, obviously, who are listening to this, you can't see what Charles has in the background, which is the brilliant work of his father, Tim Hildebrand, and his twin brother, Greg. I think most of us who didn't have the Farrah Fawcett poster in the mid-'70s, or maybe we did have the Farrah Fawcett, but we also had the Hildebrands.
Equal time,
Star Wars poster. One of the most memorable one-sheets, if not the most memorable one-sheet of all time. And of course, back there, I think we see some Lord of the Rings, and we got a lot of cool things to talk about. And it's funny because Charles comes to us through a very interesting way. He's a longtime listener of the podcast.
What?
So
I'm a fan before the podcast.
Oh my
goodness! So
absolutely. By the way, I think in my particular case, it wasn't Farrah Fawcett; it was Jenny Agutter from Logan's Run on my wall.
Understood.
We all know.
I got to tell you, no question. I would go with Jenny Agutter over.
Yeah, because Jenny put herself up on the circuit, so it's all fair.
She's available, right? Yeah. It's completely right. Yeah, no, I love it.
And you don't know what kind of work Farrah did at the New U shop.
Is that really her?
Jenny, it was all natural.
So. Yeah.
So
no,
it was
it's so true.
But we got to watch ourselves because we haven't done our Logan's Run episode yet. We got to save.
Oh wow! Okay, episode. Right. So we'll save it. So right off the bat, let me establish my Star Trek bona fides in a couple of ways. So first off, I attended my first Star Trek convention when I was 9 years old in 1976.
Wow.
It was the Bicentennial 10. That is the program guide, which somehow I kept. 9-year-old me kept.
Wow.
Now, where was that convention?
This was at the Statler Hilton Hotel, or what was then the Statler Hilton, which is right across from Madison Square Garden.
Right. Yep. It was a shithole then. It's a shithole now.
It is. It was always. It was always.
Yeah,
but
always.
But it was. To 9-year-old me. Oh.
Yeah. Totally. I went to Creation used to do a bunch of their conventions there too.
They did.
Many
Creation
times.
took over fairly soon after that, and yeah, exactly. That's
even when I was a kid, I knew it was a shithole. Like I could tell. Like this is glamorous Manhattan. This cannot be, what passes off as beautiful hotel, a luxurious hotel.
Yeah. Right. Well, at the time, I was 9, you were a kid too. We all didn't know anything about venue fees and, what it's going to take, how much can you really spend on a Star Trek convention in 1976, Yeah.
Well, Adam tells this great story about, on the podcast about how he got his dad to sign the agreement on the hotel, the first hotel for the first convention they did. And that his dad worked around the corner from the Statler Hilton or something like that. And then, the Commodore Hotel where the other Star Trek conventions took place wasn't any better.
Okay. Yeah. I don't think Central, I went
there. It's now owned by the man whose name shall not be named.
Urine decontamination is not cheap nor easy. So
let's be honest. Yes. Okay. And again, I'm sorry. I just have to keep establishing this. So also,
you're already on the show. You don't have to convince us.
Well, I know. I have to justify it for the audience, maybe. Right. So also,
is that the technical manual? It is, isn't it?
Yeah. So because of my dad, in 76, he was at the time doing a lot of work for Del Rey Ballantyne Books.
Sure.
The art director there, who later ended up going independent, was a big fan of my dad, knew I was a science fiction fan.
Everyone was a big fan. You can't say it, but we can. Everyone was and this is before, people knew Picasso in the 70s. They knew Van Gogh, but, people knew, kids and adults knew the Hildebrandts.
Yeah.
I mean, they were rock star celebrity artists.
Yes. I mean, he was in People magazine. It seems astounding, and I still think it's astounding that happened. But anyway, yeah. So the art director at Ballantyne in 76, I was in New York with my dad on a business trip for the time, and he dropped in my lap.
Sweet,
that's awesome.
Right. And I'm in awe.
Look at that. I'm jealous. I had to buy it with my allowance.
Yeah, no, I got it free, because I was a little celebrity,
We need to send you a copy of our 2023 calendar because it's done in the exact same style that the 1976 Star Trek calendar was.
Oh, I didn't pull that out. I have that too.
Of course you did.
Yes.
Of course you did.
Yes, I do. So no, which is why I'm saying I'm not I want to gush my own way because, as I say, I was a fan long before the podcast. I am a colossal fan of free enterprise.
Oh, thank you.
And I think all of us, that movie spoke to me. I actually, I always said that when I was watching that movie, it felt like someone had been videotaping my life since childhood. Because the scene of fighting over Captain Kirk in grade school was me. I'm like, what's going on here? Yeah, I was an amazing film. And
that means a lot because this is actually when we're recording this, it's the 25th anniversary of our wrapping principal photography. I mean, I can't believe it's 25 years. I mean, that's insane to me. I feel like we did it yesterday, doesn't it, Darren?
Yesterday.
I mean, really, tomorrow's. I mean, so it blows my mind that it's been 25 years, but I'm so grateful to all the people that have kept it alive because, I get this a fair amount, and I know Rob does, and I'm sure Darren does too, people who just love the movie and where it really, and I got to experience kind of what some of the Star Trek actors did because, I mean, at Comic-Con and different places, people kind of say how it literally changed their lives and I poo-poo it. And then they start to explain, I was in a gang or I was failing in school or I was this. And I realized there was another way seeing this movie. And it was like,
and it's funny it's funny how often people say, you captured me growing up. That's exactly how it was. But it's all explained by Hodgkin's law of parallel development.
True. You're right. Wait a minute. So this is the mirror universe? Wait, no.
Can't prove it.
Maybe it might be.
Definitely not.
Yeah, nobody has a goatee, so
It may be the 20.
No goatees.
It may be the 25th anniversary of Free Enterprise. But it's the 40th anniversary of the Deadly Spawn.
It is. We're going
to talk about that.
Where do you want me to start? Because I'd actually, it might be, I have a fascinating little Star Wars story.
Let's start with, it was a very delicate time. Let's start long ago and far away, and let's start with Star Wars, and then we can backtrack to sort of, you growing up as a fan and finding out who your uncle and your dad were, and
I grew up with it from the start, right? So I always knew. As we have discussed, in late 76 and early 77, my dad had a fandom. He was, as we all know, he was pretty well known.
Can you explain why he had a fandom?
I'm sorry,
right. Give people who are younger who may not know.
Although they do in a different, he ended up getting a different fandom. But so my dad and his brother, my uncle, working often together or sometimes separately, were pioneering science fiction and fantasy illustrators in the 1970s. And what I mean by that is the style that they painted in was realistic. It was very painterly. It was directly influenced by old masters of illustration like Howard Pyle and so on. And that sort of illustration, that sort of painting was just not seen in science fiction and fantasy. It was simply, that's not. So they got jobs doing book covers and record albums and movie posters. We'll get to that, and in calendars and so on, and became particularly famous for illustrating 3 years of calendars of The Lord of the Rings,
right?
In the Tolkien calendars in 76 and 77 and 78, and those, for a generation of Tolkien fans, became the image that everyone had in their minds. And it's fair to say that probably, they were sort of the dominant view of what Tolkien looked like until the Peter Jackson movies. That was sort of the default image in everyone's mind. And so,
And I just have to say that everyone looking at any of their paintings, you could absolutely tell that it was them. Yeah. And partially because of their very controlled palette
Yep.
And they had, sort of very compartmentalized palettes for different parts of the illustrations. And it's a very interesting thing because, as you said, it wasn't a technique used for many, many years.
No.
They made it their own because it's almost a hyper real kind of thing.
Yeah, very much so. They were both of them, especially my dad, they were huge movie buffs. They approached painting as photography and were at all times conscious of lighting. That was the drama of lighting, the effects of light on surfaces, and were consciously emulating, as I said, old masters of illustration, but also movies. That's, they wanted to produce a cinematic effect on screen. Or rather on masonite,
right?
Again, yes, it was not known. That was just really striking at the time. And so, as my dad said, he made people buy a lot of bad books, which is fairly true. But it powered his career, and then from then his style increasingly became sort of mainstream, and then certainly by the 1980s you saw a lot of emulation of that style in book covers and so on, and of course later on in role playing games and board games and so on, and that's where he got his fandom. Right. So, but in 1977, so he had an established fan base. And as I had said, that he had done work, a lot of advertising work, which is actually kind of his bread and butter throughout the entire career. Right. So, yeah, he's illustrating The Lord of the Rings, but he's also doing, ads for cat food. Right. Because he would do anything. He didn't care. Right. Whatever it was.
And people don't realize, or may not realize, that even though this was on virtually every kid's T-shirt throughout the 70s, it was work for hire. He didn't get a piece of that merchandise.
Right. We'll get there.
Okay.
So I'm glad you said that. So that's called foreshadowing. So in late 76, the Star Wars was set to premiere in 77, but in late 76, the what was then Lucasfilm and 20th Century Fox hadn't settled on a movie poster yet. Now it's important to remember that at this time, the poster for a movie was a huge part of the marketing campaign, right? Like now it's trivial, but then that was a single iconic image that was displayed everywhere because that was in every single newspaper in the country, which is how everyone learned what was playing that day. You actually opened a physical newspaper, you looked at, what was playing, and they always showed the movie poster, whatnot. And that was on commercials, and that was so it was an iconic piece of advertising. It was very important to them. And they didn't have one. Well, a small advertiser, because this movie was not a big budget film. It's easy to forget that, but Star Wars wasn't. It didn't get a really big push from 20th Century Fox, but it got a strange one. Small advertising company in New York called up my dad one afternoon and said, "Hey, can you come in? Can you guys come in? We got a movie poster job for you." And they had done a couple before that. They had done, a poster that wasn't used for the Barbarella re-release, by the way. Very strange. Wow. And, some other minor stuff. But they got called in and they said, "Okay, look, we've got a job for you. It's a science fiction movie. We really don't know much about it." And then they handed him a big stack of black and white 8x10 glossies. Here's some photos from it. This is the basic elements we want in the poster. They didn't have any close-ups of Mark Hamill or Carrie Fisher or whatnot. And my dad asked why, and he said, "Oh, don't worry about it. Everybody in this movie is unknown, and it doesn't matter because this movie is terrible, and no one is going to see it. So just don't worry about it." Okay, yeah, great. Okay, so he goes home, comes back, and there's only one wrinkle to this job, is that we want this as soon as humanly possible. We would like this tomorrow. If you can you do this tomorrow? Well, I don't know. As soon as possible. Okay. So he comes home. The next morning, he was driving me to school. I was 9. And of course, as you know, I'd already been to a science fiction convention. I'd been to a Star Trek convention. So I was a huge science fiction and fantasy fan. And as a 9-year-old boy, I was the target audience for this movie. Of course, no one knew that at the time, but it was me. Anyway, so he's driving me to school, and he had that big stack of black and white glossies, and he handed them over to me and said, "Here, Charles, yesterday I got this job for a movie poster for science fiction. Look at this." And so I started looking through the photos, right? And these were mostly on-set photography, almost all like publicity stills, almost no effect shots. I think there might have been like one of the Millennium Falcon and one of a TIE fighter chasing an X-wing, but almost nothing. And I said, "Wow, okay." And my dad said, I don't really know much about this movie at all. They tell me it's terrible, but they had some really weird characters in it. It's something called Chewbacca, somebody named Darth Vader. I had no idea, right? Nobody had any idea. But like I said, they tell me it was terrible. And I was paging through the photos, and I said, "Dad, I don't know. It looks pretty good." Okay. So an early positive review for Star Wars. So he does the poster. It wasn't 24 hours, but it was close. It was like 36 hours. And done, sent in, right? And again, this is just like one of many jobs. Like this week, it's this movie poster for this terrible science fiction film. Next week, I'm going to be working back on the cat food, and then, maybe another bad book cover, whatever. So it wasn't special. But then something weird happened. Like 2 weeks later, the advertising agency called back and said, "Okay, great. It's great. Fox loves the movie poster. They think it's great, but could you just come in? We have a couple of changes that you have to make." Now, of course, this is an acrylic painting, so they actually had to go in physically and paint on it. Very strange, right? Like no Photoshop, but that's really how it's done. And so they added, at the time, there were no R2 and 3PO in the poster. So they added that in. And then they add one more change. Could you make your name bigger on the poster, that prominent Hilderbrandt that you see over there? Because you see, remember, this movie is terrible. So poor Star Wars needs all the help it can get. And maybe somebody will go see this movie because it says Hilderbrandt on the poster, because God help us, this thing, please. It's never going to be anything. Okay, so he does, at this point, he really believes this is a terrible movie, right? Like, because, oh my God, they want my name on the poster. Think that's going to sell tickets? Fine. All right. So he does it. It's done. Many months pass. And, mostly I've forgotten about this, right? I had, other than seeing it like in Starlog magazine, I didn't really pay much attention because none of us did. But then in May, we get that same advertising agency sends us tickets in the mail for the New York premiere. And this is a little different than, you have to remember, this is 77, right? So there are there's no AMC, there's no Regal Cinemas, right? Like, there's a bazillion little theater chains everywhere in the country, and some guy who owns 10 and a guy who owns 5 and whatever. And so for a lot of films, it wasn't pre-booked. What they did was they have a showing, and those agents, theatrical booking agents, would come to the showing and recommend, yeah, you should take it, or yeah, you shouldn't. Well, this was that showing, right? We got tickets to that showing in New York. So this is before blind booking, where you had to show the film to the exhibitors. You had to show the film to the exhibitors, with some exceptions, like if it had a superstar or whatever, if it was a Paul Newman movie, okay, fine. Right. But again, Star Wars, who cares? It's nothing. Well, anyway, so they sent us 4 tickets. And so me, my mom, and my dad went 3, and we have 1. Wow.
Nice.
Okay. Now, this was, it was in a giant theater in Times Square, which I think was still running until like 2010. It was
probably the Lowe's Astor Plaza.
Yeah, is that okay? Yeah, I don't. That's probably what it was. Yeah,
that's where I think Empire and Jedi played.
Yeah, it was like 3 levels below the subways. It was a super deep underground thing. It was gigantic, and so now it's May and I'm 10, And I'd never been to a movie premiere before, nothing like this. And so we file into the premiere, and of course it's a very strange situation because there's no trailers or anything. It's just a huge empty theater. Everyone sits down, and on every single seat in the theater, there was a booklet.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know if you've seen these before, but
I have it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, right. So they were distributing these up into that first week.
Yeah,
again,
so what
Fox
Charles is showing us is the program book.
Yeah, I'm sorry. This is a program book that is very extensive, describing the backstory of Star Wars, the names of characters, pronunciation guides, which is really funny, and all lavishly produced because 20th Century Fox was terrified that nobody would be able to understand this.
Yeah, and at press screenings, they used to give you like a card with the credits on the back. But this was like the kind of program books you could buy in the theater, which was popular in the 70s and 80s.
Right, and they also did have that card.
Right, with the credit list.
Which Charles is showing us now, which is it's card stock that folds over with all the credits and the logo on the front.
Yeah. So both of those are sitting on
no episode 4, no a new
no bullshit. No, there never was. Yeah. So right. And it was that was sitting on every single seat in the theater, right? So I sit down, I'm paging through this thing. It was really exciting, right? And of course the movie just starts. There's no trailers, no ads, no popcorn, whatever. It just starts. And of course it starts with John Williams music and, the Star Destroyer is flying over, blasting at the rebel ship, and the theater goes wild. Everybody's like, oh, whoa, like what's going on? You can feel it, right? And everybody's behind it, and by everybody's whooping and cheering, and and when the Death Star blows up, there's explosions, and everybody's happy, and by the end, the credits roll, and people are applauding the screen. But the people are an audience full of New York City area theatrical booking agents, the most cynical audience humanly possible, right? And they're just loving it, right? So I remember we file out of the theater.
They smell money.
They smell money. They sure did. Well, so what happened was we file out of the theater, right? And this thing, as I said, was like 2 levels down. And like you went up 1 level of escalators, and that was where, the concession stands are, but that's where all the phone booths were. And for younger people listening, a phone booth is like a cell phone that's stuck to a wall in a public place, and you have to pay to use it. So. And anyway, so there are phone booths, and all the agents are lined up, right, waiting to use the phone. And we walk by, and I actually hear them saying, "Oh, take it for as long as you can. Take it at all." It's great. And then, so then we're going up one last set of escalators, right, to the ground floor to finally get out of the theater. And they had ushers with huge white plastic buckets handing out "May the Force be with you" buttons.
Wow. You got a pin that says "May the Force be with you," and
there it is. Yeah, I got everything. So,
soon after, they were handing out buttons that said "Darth Vader" spelled wrong.
Oh, I didn't know that. Really?
Yeah, VADAR.
Oh, neat. That's cool.
Typos are cool.
That's how my dad pronounced it in that.
Yeah, Vadar.
That's how he said it in the car. So that's interesting. I wonder. I don't know what that's about, but
I don't know.
Things change.
Well, tell us about that conversation.
Anyway?
All right. So so we foreshadowed it. So let's keep going.
The horrible movie that you went to see.
It was terrible. So this terrible movie. So of course, So, a week later, it's the biggest movie of all time. Giant success. Great. Which is wonderful. And it was. And my dad loved it. He loved the movie, right? We thought he was as taken and raptured by it as anybody, right? It was kind of everything he had dreamed of when he was a young fan of science fiction in the 1950s come to life, right? Sure. There it was. Anyway, so it's probably a month goes by, maybe more. And my dad was back again in New York, Manhattan. He's walking by the main Dalton bookstore right on Fifth Avenue. And displayed in the window, right, is that poster, right? Right. Of course. And it's for sale. Right? Because they're selling posters of it. Like, okay. And my dad's like smiling. Oh, that's cool. It's my poster. He walks along and he takes in a few steps, and then he says, wait a minute. I never signed a copyright release. I never signed anything. It's true. He had never signed anything because this movie was terrible. Who cares? Doesn't matter. They never got him to. Here's the money. Go away. Forget it. And they didn't do it. Yeah. So, okay. Now, we've got to skip ahead a little bit. So I am a lawyer. Specifically, I am a copyright and trademark and media and entertainment lawyer. Okay. But I was 10 in 1977 and not a lawyer.
Very experienced lawyer at the time.
Yeah, no, I didn't. Yeah, it wasn't really my forte at the time. But so I was 10 years old, and then I hear, I'm on the. I love Star Wars as much as anybody, but then I hear my parents on the phone and talking to lawyers, and I hear about words about copyright and infringement and releases and contract and promissory estoppel and so on. And like so on. So yes, they did attempt to raise the issue and retained a law firm to pursue it. But I was 10, so I couldn't advise them. They didn't know what sort of astoundingly ironclad case they had. And so they didn't get what they should have gotten had I been representing them.
If you hadn't been so ill-prepared at the time.
Yes. Well, I think the lesson of this is that you are never too young to benefit from law school, I think is the lesson.
So is this sort of like your Batman, Bruce Wayne origin story?
It is.
You're saying your parents get murdered?
I think that is why I ended up how could I not? Yeah. That is how I ended up in law school. There was no other path for me, right? Like, it's impossible. And yes, it is my Batman Bruce Wayne experience.
That's amazing.
Now,
that is wild.
It's interesting because I became friends with Tom Jung, the artist who did the original poster based on he was doing a version of Frazetta.
Yeah.
And in his contract, he did delineate that it wasn't to be sold. So that's why they went to your dad and uncle.
Fascinating. And then screwed it up because they didn't actually get that. They didn't get a contract for that.
On the basis that, George wasn't very happy with that original version. He wanted something a little more comic booky.
Oh, yeah.
That was their story.
Yeah. But it was in fact because they wanted better merchandising.
Something that wasn't ironclad.
This is amazing. I've never heard that before. Yeah. And now I own part 2 of now I know more from what I learned here.
Because I talked with him about this, and I have one of those programs that he signed to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's fascinating that the problems that artists have dealing with the people with the money.
Well, yeah, I know. It is true. Yeah. There's no way around it. It is absolutely true. One of the things, though, is that it's of course, over the years, Fox, Lucasfilm, and now Disney, have made a mint with,
of course,
that. But what's wonderful about it is that, wait, let me show you something. Hold
on. Okay, he has stepped away from the computer and is bringing something back. Computer. We don't know what it is. And he's back.
He's back.
So this was just convenient. My daughter was just the right age when this happened. Every so often there's new merchandise that comes out with that.
Sure.
The poster on it, right? And my daughter was in second grade, and they came out with a lunchbox.
Oh yeah,
man. and perfect, and especially because the lunchbox says Hilderbrandt, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Brilliant.
Amazing. Vivian, yep. I got you a lunchbox with your name on it.
Awesome.
That's so great. What he just showed us was a lunchbox that has that key, the original key art that Greg and Tim did. And it says Hilderbrandt signed on the artwork. That is so great.
And just so that you know that the let's say stinginess wasn't necessarily directed just at your uncle and dad.
No!
During the early pre-production on Return of the Jedi, Ralph McQuarrie finally got an agent.
Yeah.
And Lucas's remark was, "Oh, well, I guess we'll have to start paying him something then."
Yeah, it's so true. This goes kind of back to where we started with, which was the where artists in science fiction and fantasy got no respect.
Right.
Up,
because unfortunately, those with the money understood that they enjoyed it too much.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, I got to ask you because, both Ashley and myself, we've been part of writing teams at some points in our career. And people always say to us, how do you divide the divisional labor? How does that work as a writing team, right?
Yeah.
So my question to you is, how did Tim and Greg work together as an artist team? That to me just blows my mind.
It actually turned out to be pretty simple. They would discuss sort of overall composition together. They would the basic composition of whatever the image would be, and then they specialized. So if it was mostly an environmental painting, mostly images of the environment, of buildings, of trees and brooks and whatnot, that was my dad's specialty. And if it was mostly characters, mostly just humans and very little else, that was Greg's specialty. And they both did both, but that was their specialization. And so that's basically how they divided it up by and large. Although, sometimes, especially later when they were working on things like the Marvel collector cards in the 1990s, there was just so much work that they couldn't specialize. It was like, okay, you do these 100 cards and I'm doing these 100 cards. Right. That was the end of it. There was really no way around it.
That's fascinating because painting is usually a very lone activity.
It was
the ability to break that up and keep something afterwards that looks like something cohesive is absolutely amazing.
Yeah. Well, they did it. And to be fair, it was most of their physical painting work, like literally sitting at an easel and desk in my dad's case, was solitary, right? Like the collaborative aspect of it was largely earlier
in the planning and understood. That's a fascinating process.
Do you think the fact that they had pursued this litigation maybe is why they didn't do more Star Wars going forward?
Oh no. So they got invited back. So they they were asked to do the movie poster for Empire.
Yeah.
Right.
And they turned it down. I know. Because they were convinced they had something way better themselves.
Sure, 1979.
Yes.
Ushurak.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
So, catapulted on the strength of the Tolkien calendars and now the Star Wars poster and then even the Sword of Shannara. Actually, the Sword of Shannara is an important part of this story. My dad and my uncle decided, well, we can do our own sword and sorcery fantasy universe. No problem. And in their defense, the Sword of Shannara was a big hit. I don't know if you guys have read it, but the Sword of Shannara was a big hit. It remains to be this day, but it is. I don't think anybody would dispute that the first book is just a point-for-point retelling of The Lord of the Rings. It's not, there's nothing original in it, right? Mm-hmm. And my dad and uncle illustrated it. And based on that, they got sort of convinced, well, anyone can do this, right? Okay. So, and apparently folks at Bantam Books were also convinced that anybody could do this. So they ended up backing the creation of this, which is a lavishly illustrated, both black and white and color, sword and sorcery fantasy novel, Tolkien-esque, we would call it today. Yeah. It's a quest story of a dark lord seeking to take over a fantasy kingdom. I mean, what do you want, right?
Something completely different.
But totally different, completely different. Don't you understand?
Yeah, obviously.
These aren't orcs.
No,
they're borks.
Yes, that's right. They're not orcs. But so they were this. Yeah, again, this is a weird time. This was a fairly big success, at the time. Again, there wasn't a lot of stuff out there if you were a science fiction and fantasy fan. It's certainly not stuff of that lavish.
It was slim pickings.
Slim pickings, right? So it was a big hit book. Okay, well, this piled on that. The big hit book said, well, we should make a movie. Right? That's obviously the next step.
Why not?
We should do this. And so my dad and my uncle, with the backing of Bantam, they were just as naive, decided that this should be easy. We'll just get a movie made. Okay.
As you do.
In the world of 1978 and 79, before CGI, and somehow the plan was that they were going to make a gigantic sword and sorcery, Lord of the Rings style spectacle film with giant marching armies of orcs. I'm sorry, not orcs. No. Attacking castles and whatnot, and that was going to be financially viable.
Here come the dorks.
Here come the dorks. Yes. So my parents, but mostly Bantam, invested in the creation of a colossal multimedia presentation of slides, some limited animation, lots of photography. Imagine a sort of lavish Ken Burns movie, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Except all in color, with voiceover narration. It's about 30 minutes long and explaining a cut down version of the story of this book, which, by the way, is not like it's not particularly complicated to begin with. The reason this works so well is because, as I said, my dad and uncle, but particularly my dad, were colossal movie fans, and it was sort of their motivating guide from day one.
Of course.
When they started this project, they didn't start with a story outline or with a script or even a plot idea outline. They made storyboards.
Yeah.
They actually produced storyboards, hundreds and hundreds of individual illustrations to storyboard a whole movie for Ushurak. No dialogue, but plenty of imagery. And so that's what they were doing when they got the call to do Empire and then turned it down because pshaw. Yeah. So
they were too busy with their epic new franchise.
We're too busy with something that's way big.
Yeah.
But they did do some work later on in the 90s for Lucasfilm.
Yeah. So whatever happened there, and whatever happened in 77 certainly was quickly forgotten. There were no hard feelings. And yes, in the 1990s, they were contacted in connection with the release of the Phantom Menace. Right, there was a giant merchandising push. And well, actually, a little bit before that, they did the Shadows of the Empire art set.
Zizor, who knew?
Zizor. That Millennium Falcon is from that set.
Yep.
I had a bunch more, obviously, but yes. So they were contacted with that. They were part of that. They did, like Star Trek fan magazine covers and so on. But then, in connection with the Phantom Menace, they got, they did a lot. They illustrated, the children's pop-up book and a coloring book and that sort of stuff. Like, there was a flood of stuff that came out, as we all remember.
It's interesting that legal action doesn't put you on their no list. It puts you on their we should take these people seriously list.
It certainly did in that case. Yeah, I don't know. It also may have been, it may have been, I can only speculate here.
Sure.
But the cause of action that they had was against 20th Century Fox, right? Not Lucasfilm.
Right.
Yeah.
So and by the time Empire came along, obviously Lucas is making it himself. He's backing it with his own funds. So, maybe he never cared, right?
Yeah.
Or had anything to do with it.
Or had anything to do with it. Yeah. Except, no, he did say make their name bigger, right? Put your name bigger on the post.
And that's kind of what happened with Galactica too, where it was 20th Century Fox suing over Galactica in 78, not Lucasfilm.
Right.
So my dad, my dad had the most bizarre career. So he had a weird connection to Battlestar Galactica too. So again, in connection with this,
right,
he scouted out, who's going to do the effects for Ushurak, right?
Right.
And naturally, John Dykstra was high on his list.
Right.
John Dykstra was interested. So he went out for a meeting with John Dykstra while Dykstra was shooting Galactica.
Right.
And specifically, he was there on the day where he wasn't a fan of Galactica, but what I later kind of figured out, they were shooting Gun on Ice Planet Zero.
Of course.
Oh, wow.
At the time.
Right.
But yeah, he got, they took him on a tour of the set, they showing him all the models and everything. But yeah, so.
That's fascinating.
This was just a crazy thing. It was so strange. At one point, they got a meeting with Joseph E. Levine and who watched this presentation for 30 minutes and said, okay, I love that. That's really cool, but that's going to be $200 million.
Yeah.
And $200 million, 1978
in those dollars.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So we're talking, this is $1 billion movie.
Yeah. James Cameron didn't exist yet.
As you say, which now is a low budget film, but then no, that was unacceptable. And
his Super 8 movies cost that, but
so it was just impossible. And but I don't know. Is this any crazier than Jodorowsky's Dune as a project?
No, absolutely
nothing is crazier than Jodorowsky's.
Right.
How?
I think so.
And then how did
that's what
Deadly Spawn come about? At what point did...
Okay, so this all collapsed, right? Right. This went nowhere. Much sound and fury. All signifies nothing. And my dad is still just dreaming of being a movie maker because at the end of the day, he really didn't want to be an artist. He wanted to make movies. That
everybody wants to be something else.
Everybody, it's
top guy in your field, and you still want to be doing something else. The writers want to direct. The artists want to be producers. I mean, it's crazy.
And the directors want to act. And yeah, absolutely, all true. Well, and here it was. So he really wanted to be a movie producer, director, whatever. And that was what he wanted to do. And so very soon, right around 1980, 79, 80, right about the same time as this fell apart, my dad was at a tiny little science fiction convention he was a guest in New York, met up with some other folks who were wannabe low budget filmmakers. And it was like one of those Mickey Rooney musicals. Hey, we can save the whole town. We'll put on the big show ourselves. Mm-hmm. Let's make a movie, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what happened. So my dad, again, through convention contacts, linked up with young, hungry special effects artists and some New York theatrical folks, and put it all together and decided, let's make a low budget science fiction horror film.
Sure.
And they did.
What was that?
First, there was the invasion of the body snatchers. Then there was Alien. Now there is the Deadly Spawn. It began with a meteor crashing to Earth. No one knew the mystery of the mutant spores it contained. Now they are free. They will grow and reproduce rapidly, eating anything and anyone in their path.
Learn something.
The Deadly Spawn. The nightmare is just beginning. What do you do when unknown terror surrounds you? What do you do when there is no escape? Nowhere to hide from being eaten alive.
What the was that?
The Deadly Spawn. They just keep multiplying like demon seed. The Deadly Spawn, extraterrestrial terror. They're full of surprises. And the best is yet to come.
Let me go! Let me go! There's no such thing!
Can anything stop these strange creatures? The movie real science fiction fans have been waiting for. The Deadly Spawn wants you to see them at this theater soon. They need every person they can get. New from 21st Century Distribution. Rated R.
It's actually astounding that it got made, but it's true. They did very slowly. So shooting on...
But it's not astounding that it got made. It's astounding that it got released.
Oh, yeah. Well, oh, my God. Right. So that was another piece of luck that's just amazing. So it was, right. So shooting at night, not on weekends, mostly in our house, right, as the venue to be invaded. We made a horror film. So I got the gig as the lead kid.
Yeah.
I was available.
You were still working on your law
and
degree.
And your agent was very reasonable.
My agent was very reasonable. I was still working on my law degree. Yeah, that's right. Same deal, right? Like I should have gotten more if I had been representing me at that time. I would have driven a harder bargain. But nevertheless, well, this led to slowly when I was in essentially 7th and 8th grade, we made a movie, and it's a labor of love. Nobody got paid at all. Everyone did it for a piece of the action.
Right.
Mm-hmm. A very small.
Your Star Trek bona fides are.
I got it. Yeah.
Settled.
Yeah,
yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. I didn't. Yeah. Okay. When Adam Nimoy came to my convention that I was helping to run, I didn't get to do my Nimoy to him. I was so disappointed. But anyway, so it got made, and yes, this was right before video recorders became universal, and right before the direct-to-video as a concept really existed. So lots of movies that today would never get a theatrical release were still at that time released to the theater. And so this fantastically cheap, I think the actual out-of-pocket costs were about $30,000 in $1981. So let's call it right. 60 or 70 grand today. At most. That was the out-of-pocket cost for the production. And this got a theatrical release. We got and one of the weird, so it was a small distribution company called 21st Century,
right?
But who offered the best deal, right? In terms of we'll give you this percentage and so on. But what is weirder to me is that also in the bidding to release it was Paramount. What? Now, but they wanted too much, and so we, not me, but the producers ended up going with the small distributor. Okay, it was released, and it was, it's so strange. It was released released regionally, right? Nobody could pay for, a national release.
The Corman model of bicycling prints around the country.
Yes, absolutely, bicycling prints around the country. God help you. How many scratches are on that print when it reaches Nebraska, right?
Yeah, exactly.
How that works. But anyway, New York got released first. And it premiered in Times Square. And on my 16th birthday, I went into Times Square and I saw my name on the theatrical marquee, walked in and sat down in the theater, saw my name on a screen and heard the audience applaud while I was 16 years old. Okay. And that is not the most amazing thing that happened, because the next weekend, when it got a general release in the New York area, it played in the town where I was going to high school. Right. So there's a Saturday night. Right. And we'll walk into the theater and sitting down. And I'm 16 years old, sophomore in high school, and it's filled with everybody, all my friends and everybody from high school. And my name comes on the screen, says starring Charles George Hildebrand, and everybody's cheering, whoa, okay, right? Like pretty amazing. I didn't have anything to compare it to, right? Like at some level, I did think it was absolutely really cool, but I had no idea how probably warping that experience was. Like, I mean, I got to say, like,
it's not Star Wars.
Well, yeah, I mean, like all teenagers think they're great, but I had objective proof, like,
especially when Jenny Agutter called and said, "How can we work together now?"
Yeah, exactly. Like, when is she calling? Like, when is that going to happen? It was great fun, right? Like, it was amazing fun. I was on, Live at 5 and all kinds of wild
and the commercial
stuff.
was on all the time.
All the time. Right. The movie real science fiction fans have been waiting for.
Yeah. The deadly spawn.
And it was, it's funny because it was, again, this is a case of like, it was, even though
Charles
it was
is holding up fantastic films, the Starlog wannabe of the era.
Yeah, the Starlog wannabe with, the deadly spawn there. Like, and it was, it was amazing that this low budget thing, again, People Magazine, the deadly spawn, right? Like, I mean, it was so strange, and it became like here's the LP record album.
Wow! Oh yeah,
that's sweet. Awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And it acquired a fandom, right? That persists to this day. It has had 2 DVD releases, 1 Blu-ray release, and another one is coming.
In 4K.
In 4K, glorious 4K. It's really not going to look any better, But yeah. There are so many. I forgot. John Dodds was the effects director. Who he and I remained friends the whole time since then. I've actually talked to him all the time. He's the guy who designed and built the actual monsters.
Sure.
He went on to
your house.
Yeah, he went on to a major career in film and particularly Broadway. He ended up doing the makeups for the Beauty and the Beast Disney stage show for many years.
There you go.
Yeah. But I think he tried to keep track of it at one point. I think there have been 40 different video releases in every conceivable language all around the world. It's so weird.
And did you guys ever see a dime?
Oh, yes. I made nearly $1,000.
Nice.
Again, my representation was terrible. Yes.
And how did your dad feel after the movie opened? Was he he was anxious to do more, right?
He was. It was so odd. He remember, as I said, this was what he really wanted to do, and it ended up being the thing he was most proud of in his life.
Oh, wow.
It was
including
so right.
You.
Well, at least I'm connected to it, right? It's all the same thing. And he loved it. And yes, he wanted to do more. He, that didn't happen. I'm, a lot of different reasons. I think part of it, in a big way, as you can just see from things like that crazy half-hour multimedia presentation. My dad, for all of his love of movies, never really made a serious effort to try and figure out the system and work with people and learn how movies are made for real and any of that. He didn't do that. So it was just the way it was. So
but he went on and did some glorious one-sheets. I mean, Secret of Nim, stunning. Well, that was 82. And then, of course, he did the one for Clash of the Titans. That's great. And did some just gorgeous. I mean, and that's only the one sheets, obviously.
And those are iconic, right? Secret of Nim was a particular love of his because when he was very young, he wanted to be a Disney animator. Like that was animation was his first love of movies, right? That's what made him love movies, and so he really bonded with Don Bluth personally.
Sure.
In terms of what Bluth was trying to do at that time. This is before the Disney Renaissance. So Disney was producing a lot of craptastic stuff.
The Black Cauldron.
Right. Well, I was thinking more like, the Aristocats.
It's
the Aristocats.
It's the AAA Society, the Abused Artists Association.
Mauschwitz. Mauschwitz was what I always heard.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's what they called Disney at the time.
Yeah.
Some people probably still do.
I'm sure, yeah, but for different reasons now. But that meant a lot to him. He was really taken by that. So yeah, I know it was astounding. And then all of that, and he at the same time, round about the same time, I was a gamer. I have been my whole life, and I was an early adoptee of Dungeons and Dragons.
Sure.
And so I brought that to his notice, and this is my mom actually contacted TSR, what was then the rights holder for Dungeons and Dragons, and he ended up having something of a successful mini career doing Dungeons and Dragons calendar in the early 80s.
And was that a direct result of all the acclaim for his Tolkien work in the 70s?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Because the same people who were, at this point, art directors at TSR were, had been fans of everything back to the
of course.
The calendars. So yeah, and then I guess like the final phase of his career was was comic books, like starting in the 1990s. He started to do Marvel stuff, things like the vast numbers of collector cards and posters, promotional posters, lots of comic book one-off covers, sometimes whole comic books. I think I've got something here. And at one point, he was even doing a daily strip, which was Terry and the Pirates in the late 1980s.
Wow.
Syndicated, yeah. So he really got into that.
That's fascinating. What an amazing body of work.
Yeah.
And consistently great.
Yeah.
No matter what they were doing.
Yeah. My dad was, it was interesting to see him. So he was obviously a huge science fiction and fantasy fan, for sure, right? But, and given everything else being equal, he would certainly rather be doing a painting of, a dragon or something like that. But he was a consummate professional in that if he was back to doing the cat food, right, he still put 100% into that.
Yeah.
And
every freaking whisker is there, baby.
Every whisker's there. But he'd always be like studying, okay, well, the light's going to reflect off the can this way, and that's going to cause an ambient reflection from this. And he really could do that. And that's why it all had that level of quality. Because
does the apple fall far from the tree? Do you have any artistic talent, or are you just a legal eagle?
No, I dabble. I do. I do. I dabble. I like it, but the difference is I am the opposite of my dad. Like I'm only interested in it if it's something I care about. Like I'm not going to paint a can of cat food. That's too hard. Yeah. I don't want to do that. If I were going to do that, I'd write a contract. Exactly. That's stupid. Yeah. So no, I do. It was funny. I don't do much of it, but when I do, it's funny. Like my family, I have my wife and I have two daughters, and we were at a YMCA family camp type thing last year. It's one of these mountain, picture Friday the 13th, a mountain lakeside camp where
it's a real family atmosphere. Okay.
Yeah. Very wholesome family atmosphere.
Moms are very important.
Yeah. Well, I figure as a veteran horror star, I am safe in that environment. I know what to do. And so anyway, they, part of the, they have usual activities with canoeing and whatnot. And then a big part of this camp had one of those paint your own pottery things, right? Whatever. And I don't do that very much, but I have occasionally done it in the past. But what happened was that one of the paint your own pottery things was this cool dragon. It was perched on this globe. And Beth and the kids were like, oh, let's do one. So I grabbed, okay, yeah, I'll do it. I'll do this one. Okay. So, all right, I started. Now, everybody else, they're just painting in the way I guess everybody paints it. They just painted flat colors. But I'm like, well, no. I got to shade this in 3D. Yeah. I got to paint it like a Hildebrand painting, right?
The bounce light's coming off the mountain.
The bounce light's coming up the dam. So I did, right? So I started building up the layers, and this is the wings are translucent here, so it's got to be lighter, whatever. And then slowly over 3 days, like everybody in the paint your own pottery zone in the hobby area, they all start crowding around my table. And I'm like, oh, what? Are you an artist? And I said, no, my dad was an artist.
I played one on TV.
Oh, man. Well, I got to say, Charles, this has been fantastic. I'm so glad that you joined us on the show because what amazing memories and a testimonial to your dad, who was just obviously so special to you, but so special to fans of the genre. And it's just really, it's really great.
And I want to repeat something to Mark, I think I emailed you this, but I got to say this out loud. My dad was a huge fan of Free Enterprise.
I love hearing that.
Only he could have done the one sheet.
Oh my God. I know. I wish.
He would have done it. He would have loved it. So it's actually, so what happened there, I loved that movie from the first moment I saw it. And which was, I was running on cable in the 90s constantly.
Yeah.
So I called up my dad and I said, Dad, you got to watch this film. It's on Cinemax or whatever. No,
it was actually, this is interesting. I think it was on HBO. Then it was on Showtime. And then it was on Sci-Fi Channel. It's like it hit for the cycle.
I saw it on Showtime. I'm sure I saw it on Showtime. So I called him up and I said, I started to describe it to him. And he said, oh, you mean that movie about the two guys who meet William Shatner in the bookstore? That film is hilarious.
Oh my God.
And he started talking about, oh my God, the musical Julius Caesar. It's great.
Wow.
He loved it.
That's great.
That's
especially,
awesome.
with the anniversary. But, like I said, I had a poster. The poster, like many people on my wall growing up, I love that poster. I mean, I have a lot of the D&D and the Lord of the Rings stuff, and so that just gives me such joy to hear. And I watched The Deadly Spawn at least once on VHS.
There you go. At least once. So, and yes, absolutely. I was gonna, so like the continuing presence of that poster, like this is just from last year.
Yeah, this is Time Magazine.
Wow. Yeah,
45th
Time Magazine
anniversary
cover.
tribute to Star Wars with the Hildebrand painting on the cover.
Yeah.
Wow.
Astounding.
Here's the thing that sticks with me. And I have to ask you about it because it's just been tickling the back of my brain since you said it. Mm-hmm. You mentioned that your dad said, that he felt like he had sold a lot of crappy books to people.
Yeah.
And what I'm curious about is, did he ever say, like, which one haunted him? Which one kept him up at night? What's the worst thing that he did to the public?
The Sword of Shannara.
Oh my goodness.
Really? No. So yeah, he was. That's what led to Ushurak. He was so cynical, and it was just a ripoff of the Lord of the Rings, and yeah, he was that. Yes. Now, to be fair, he illustrated a lot. He did a lot of really good book covers too, a bunch of Paul Anderson stuff and some C.J. Cherry novels and all that. So
Melanie Foster.
Well, to be completely fair to everybody, Lord of the Rings is a ripoff of the Hobbit. So let's just be honest.
What?
Well, look, the funny thing is, this whole episode came because I was looking at some old Star logs I found in the garage, and there was this giant article on Ushurak, which is
a totally different
fascinating.
property.
And then I'm thinking, this is so interesting. I knew nothing about this. Obviously, I'd read it 40 years ago, but I hadn't thought about it since. And I'm like, oh my God, well, Charles is a fan of the show. We should have him on to talk about his dad and his uncle, because that would be so interesting. And we can hear the story. And then, of course, it ended up being far more interesting than I even anticipated. So I'm really, really glad to hear.
We didn't even get to talk about James Bond. God.
No, we didn't.
Goodness.
We didn't. But your dad should have done the posters for some of those movies. Although Robert McGinnis, I got to say, did a pretty freaking swell job.
My dad,
we didn't get to talk about Bond. That'll be for our next podcast.
My dad did end up sitting in on a recording session with John Barry.
Oh, how cool is that?
That's really cool.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Do you remember what film?
I don't. But it was. This would have been in the 80s. So I don't know.
Was it a Bond movie or was it one of his other films?
No, it was not. It was not a Bond
movie.
Africa. Yeah, it was probably that, or right.
Somewhere
Dances
in Time.
with Wolves.
Dances with Wolves, right?
Yeah. Doesn't matter. They all sound like Moonraker, right? After a certain point, he just kept it's just Moonraker over and over.
You're not
they
wrong.
all sound like Moonraker.
Don't they?
Oh man, I go to the mattresses for John Barry, but I have friends who are big film music fans as well, and
I love
like, it all sounds. It's like we talk about James Horner sounding the same, but Barry all sounds the same. But I love John Barry, and like Body Heat is, that's one of the great scores of all time. Right. I mean, even and his schlock is great, like Stella Star.
I was going to say, exactly, or The Black Hole, right?
Like The Black Hole is a great score.
It is. It's
all 12 minutes of it.
Yeah.
Dun, 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 dun.
That's great.
Well, we'll have to save The Black Hole for another time.
Yeah,
please. But this was so great having you on. I'm so glad you did this. This was so much fun.
Oh, I had a wonderful time. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh no, it's our pleasure, and we'll have to have you back because you're an interesting cat.
Anytime. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Charles.
Thank you, Charles.
Wow, that was great. We had to send him down to engineering, but I heard Beverly's putting on a play. What?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
I don't know. I'm trying to go with the whole
completely different
78
enterprise,
thing.
man.
It's an entirely new enterprise. You don't know it at 12th as well as we do because clearly you're confused.
I thought that was so much fun, and he's a hoot, as we say.
Yeah, I could listen to him all day. I mean, it's just that this episode would have gone as long as a countdown on Inglorious Trexperts.
Plus, we have to record more episodes today.
I'm glad I was able to fill in a couple of the blanks between their Star Wars poster and Tom Jung's, because that's a story that is shrouded in antiquity and mystery.
Oh, that was great, Darren.
Because just as a piece of luck, I got to work with Tom Jung on a movie, and he was just doing illustration work. And I said, "You're not the same Tom Jung who did the Star Wars poster." He said, "Yeah, I am." And I glommed onto him for at least a couple months because he was a really sweet guy, and again, an artist that was often taken advantage of. But the funny thing is that because of his protecting that artwork, he didn't get to have his stuff on everything under the sun. So it's a very strange world out there for the artists.
Well, and that's what I love about our podcast. It's not just a bunch of fans jawing about things we like. The fact that we've worked in this business for so long gives us, I think a really interesting perspective when we're talking to these people. And I found that story about Tom Jung fascinating. It's all because you've worked in the business these many years and had, these interesting insights. And
lucky to have connected to so many of the people that influenced me over the years. And like all of us.
Yeah. Well, look, I got to tell you, it means so much to me. And I'll have to share this with Rob, that Tim Hildebrand was such a big fan of Free Enterprise.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So awesome.
I mean, that's really special, because it's like the people that we idolize growing up to then have them, because that's what Free Enterprise is about. It's about, our love of Shatner, but it's about our love of genre. And then to have somebody who's like this genre legend, like Tim Hildebrand, be a fan of what we created.
Yeah.
It's really, cool. It's really special. It's special. So, anyway, well, this was great. And, it's always fun, stopping down on Deck 78, to explore some Trek adjacent subjects. And of course, we'll be back. If you want to continue to enjoy Deck 78, you can subscribe at TrexpertsPlus.com. And we are attempting to make sure that our international listeners will be able to have access to that real soon. So check that out. Hopefully, by the time you listen to this, we'll have resolved the issues with it just being domestic only, because you're missing out on some great shows if you're not. And if you're a fan of the podcast, please listen to Inglorious Trexperts every Thursday. 4:30 movie drops Fridays, and Trexperts Briefing Room on Tuesday. So that's a full week of the Trexperts Podcast Network, with Deck 78 coming in on a hopefully regular basis on Wednesdays when we drop new episodes. So a lot to follow. And of course, you can meet us in Richmond, Virginia at
At least 66% of us.
They'll be there at the Richmond convention, galaxycon.com for more details. And we'll be doing a couple of panels, and it should be a lot of fun for most of us. Some of us.
Well, 66% of us will be 66% sober. It'll be great.
Well, there you go. But I will be there and wishing you well. And if you want to actually start a conversation, probably tell me you like Free Enterprise, because maybe I will talk to you then. Otherwise, I'll just give you a dainty wave and sign a poster and send you on your merry way. Okay.
And if you're lucky, brief eye contact.
Brief eye contact.
But we're not promising anything.
A little flick of the gaze.
Don't you look at me.
Don't look at me.
Don't look at me.
Let's not go all Frank Booth on this. I mean, I'm a misanthrope, but I'm not a complete asshole. Anyway, well, thank you for joining us here on behalf of Darren Dochterman, Ashley Edward Miller, and a big shout out and thanks to Mark Rivera and Peter Holmstrom for everything they do for the podcast. But until next time, fire the rockets.
Deck 78 is an exclusive podcast from Treksperts Plus.